You know what they say about jokes. They're only funny until they're not. I learned that lesson on a sweltering August afternoon in my own backyard, standing next to a smoking grill with a beer going warm in my hand. If anyone wants Evan, I'm giving him away, Nora announced to our gathered neighbors, her voice carrying that particular brand of condescension she'd perfected over 12 years of marriage. She gestured toward me like I was a piece of furniture she'd grown tired of. The neighbors chuckled politely, all except Tessa, our 28-year-old neighbor who lived in the renovated townhouse next door. She looked directly at Nora with those sharp green eyes and said, "I'll take him." The laughter stopped, just like that. I watched my wife's face transform, the practiced smile cracking like old paint. For maybe 3 seconds, nobody spoke. The only sounds were the hiss of burgers on the grill and a lawnmower somewhere down the street. That's very funny, Tessa," Nora finally managed, but her voice had gone tight. Tessa shrugged, taking a sip from her wine glass. "Who says I'm joking?" I always knew a joke was a weapon. Turns out, so was my wife's smile. And right then, watching Nora struggle to regain control of her little performance, I realized something had shifted. The careful balance of our social circle, the unspoken rules about who could say what. Tessa had just thrown a wrench into all of it. The party limped along for another hour, but the damage was done. I caught Nora shooting daggers at Tessa whenever she thought nobody was looking. Meanwhile, Tessa seemed completely unbothered, chatting easily with the other neighbors like she hadn't just lobbed a social grenade into our backyard barbecue. As a freelance photographer, I'd learned to read people through a lens, to catch those unguarded moments when masks slip. Nora's mask had slipped today, and I'd seen what was underneath. The contempt, the assumption that I was hers to dispose of as she pleased. That night, after we'd cleaned up the debris of our social gathering, Nora was unusually quiet. She moved around our bedroom with sharp, efficient movements, yanking clothes off hangers and tossing them into the hamper with more force than necessary. "That girl has some nerve," she finally said, not looking at me. "Tessa? She was just having fun." Fun. Nora practically spat the word. She was making a fool of me in front of our neighbors. "I thought you were the one making jokes about giving me away." She whirled around then, and I saw something in her expression that made me take a step back. "That was different, Evan. That was just conversation. What she did was calculated." Maybe it was, but what struck me wasn't Tessa's calculation. It was Nora's reaction to it. The way she'd assumed ownership over me, over the narrative, over everything, like I was just a prop in her carefully orchestrated life. I'd been feeling restless for months, maybe years. The photography work was steady but uninspiring, mostly corporate headshots and the occasional wedding. Nora's legal career was thriving, which meant our social calendar revolved around her colleagues and their tedious dinner parties where I was introduced as Nora's husband, the photographer, with just enough emphasis on photographer to make it sound quaint. But tonight felt different. Tonight, someone had looked at me like I was worth taking. After Nora fell asleep, I found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying the afternoon. Tessa's words kept echoing. "I'll take him." Not as a joke, not as small talk, but as a statement, a possibility. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, my phone was buzzing with a text message. 3:17 a.m. Unknown number. "Hope you don't mind me getting your number from the neighborhood directory. Just wanted to say, I meant what I said today. If you ever want to talk, I'm usually up late. T." I stared at the message for a long time, thumb hovering over the reply button. Nora was breathing steadily beside me, completely oblivious. The smart thing would be to delete the message and pretend it never happened. Instead, I found myself typing back, "Thanks. Today was interesting." The response came almost immediately. Interesting is one word for it. Your wife looked like she wanted to throw me over the fence. Despite everything, I almost smiled. She's not used to competition. Who says I'm competing? Maybe I'm just interested in something she's taking for granted. That stopped me cold. Taking for granted. Was that what this was? 12 years of marriage reduced to casual dismissal at a backyard barbecue? I didn't reply to Tessa's message that night, but I didn't delete it either. The next morning, Nora was back to her usual efficient self. Coffee made, news playing on the kitchen TV, already dressed in one of her sharp business suits. She kissed my cheek absently while scrolling through emails on her phone. "I've got the Morrison case deposition today," she said without looking up. "Probably won't be home until late." "The Morrison case?" The corporate merger I've been working on for 3 months, Evan. The one that could make partner track for me? Her tone suggested I should have remembered this crucial detail of her professional life. Maybe I should have. But lately, Nora's cases all sounded the same to me. Rich people fighting other rich people over money, with lawyers like my wife getting wealthy in the crossfire. Right. Good luck with it. She paused at the door, seeming to remember something. Oh, and Evan, maybe we should avoid having Tessa over for a while. I don't think she's quite our type of people. Our type of people, meaning people who knew their place in Nora's carefully arranged world. After she left, I sat in our kitchen drinking coffee that had gone cold, thinking about types of people and places and the assumptions we make about both. Through the window, I could see Tessa's townhouse. She was on her small back deck, also drinking coffee, also alone. She waved when she saw me looking. Just a small gesture, but somehow it felt like an invitation. I had 3 shoots scheduled that day: a corporate headshot session downtown, a family portrait in the suburbs, and product photos for a local restaurant. Routine work that paid the bills, but didn't exactly set my creative soul on fire. Between the headshots and the family session, I found myself driving past Nora's law firm. Kellerman, Bray, and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a glass and steel building in the city's revitalized downtown district. Nora loved working there, loved the prestige, the high-stakes cases, the 6-figure salary that dwarfed my freelance income. I'd been there plenty of times for office parties and spouse events. Always felt like an outsider among the lawyers and their perfectly polished partners. Nora never said anything directly, but I caught the subtle signals, the way she'd steer conversations away from my work, the apologetic tone when she had to explain what I did for a living. Evan's an artist, she'd say, like that explained everything and nothing at once. Sitting in my car across from her building, I wondered what Nora really thought about our marriage. Whether she saw me as a partner or just another accessory in her professional wardrobe, someone safe and undemanding who'd be there when she needed a +1 for firm events. The family portrait session went well, a young couple with 2 kids under 5, all of them laughing and chaotic and genuinely happy to be together. The kind of family photos that made me remember why I'd gotten into photography in the first place, capturing real moments, real connections. By the time I got home that evening, Nora still wasn't back from her deposition. The house felt empty, sterile, like a showroom rather than a home. My phone buzzed. Another text from Tessa. Saw you leave this morning. Hope you had a good day shooting. This time I replied without hesitation. Long day, but productive. Thanks for asking. I'm grilling dinner on the deck if you want company. Nora's car isn't in the driveway. I looked out the window. Sure enough, Tessa was on her deck again, this time tending a small portable grill. She'd changed out of whatever she'd worn to work into jeans and a simple t-shirt. She looked relaxed, comfortable in her own skin in a way that Nora never seemed to be. Thanks, but I should probably wait for Nora. Of course, but the offer stands. I make excellent burgers, and I promise not to give you away to anyone. Despite everything, that made me laugh out loud. Give me away. Like I was something valuable enough to be given. Nora finally came home at nearly 10 p.m., looking exhausted and frustrated. The deposition had gone badly, the opposing counsel had been better prepared than expected, and several key witnesses had been less cooperative than hoped. This case is going to make or break my partnership chances, she said, dropping her briefcase by the door with a heavy thud. 3 years of work, and it all comes down to whether I can salvage this mess. I made the appropriate sympathetic noises, asked the right questions, offered to pour her a glass of wine. But part of me was thinking about Tessa's text, about burgers on the deck and conversations that didn't revolve around billable hours and partnership tracks. You're distracted, Nora said suddenly. Just tired. Long day of shoots. She studied my face with the same intensity she probably used on hostile witnesses. Everything okay? You've seemed different since yesterday. Different. Maybe I was. Maybe something had shifted when Tessa looked at me like I was worth taking, worth talking to, worth more than casual dismissal at a backyard party. I'm fine, Nora. Just thinking about work stuff. She seemed to accept this, or maybe she was too wrapped up in her own professional drama to push further. We went to bed without talking much more, lying side by side like polite strangers. But I wasn't thinking about work stuff. I was thinking about 12 years of marriage, about jokes that weren't funny, about the difference between being taken and being taken for granted. And I was thinking about green eyes and honest smiles and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I was worth more than I'd been settling for. The next morning brought another routine: coffee, news, Nora rushing off to salvage her case. But this time, after her car disappeared around the corner, I found myself walking across the yard to Tessa's back deck. She was there, like she'd been waiting. "Morning, neighbor," she said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Coffee?" "Sure." She poured from a French press. Real coffee, not the instant stuff Nora preferred for efficiency. It tasted like something worth savoring. "So," Tessa said, settling into her chair with easy grace, "want to tell me what's really going on in that head of yours?" And for the first time in longer than I could remember, someone was asking because they actually wanted to know the answer. 3 days later, I learned that sometimes the most devastating truths hide in the most ordinary places. I was in my home office, really just a converted spare bedroom cluttered with camera equipment and half-finished projects, trying to edit photos from a wedding I'd shot over the weekend. The bride and groom looked blissfully happy in every frame, gazing at each other like they'd discovered something precious and rare. It made me think about Nora and me on our wedding day. Had we ever looked at each other like that? The photos suggested we had, but memories can be unreliable things. My computer was running slow, probably overloaded with high-resolution image files. I needed to clear some space, maybe back up some old folders to external storage. That's when I noticed Nora's laptop sitting on the desk beside mine. She'd left it behind in her rush to get to another crucial Morrison case meeting. Nora never forgot her laptop. It was practically an extension of her arm, filled with case files and client communications and the digital architecture of her professional life. I should have just called her, let her know she'd forgotten it. Should have been a good husband and driven it downtown to her office. Instead, I found myself opening it. Not to snoop, I told myself, just to check if she had any photos backed up that I could transfer to free up space on my machine. Practical reasons. Innocent reasons. The laptop was password protected, but I knew Nora's patterns. She used variations of the same few passwords for everything, usually combinations of her maiden name, our anniversary, or her law school graduation year. It took 3 tries before I got in. Her desktop was organized with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to everything else. Folders labeled by case name, client files arranged chronologically, everything in its proper place. I was looking for a photos folder when I saw something that made me pause. A folder labeled Personal Private. I stared at it for a long moment. This was the line, wasn't it? The boundary between innocent space clearing and actual snooping. Between trust and suspicion. But something about that folder name bothered me. Nora wasn't secretive by nature. She was direct, sometimes brutally so. What did she need to keep private from me? I clicked on the folder. Inside were subfolders organized by month, going back almost 2 years. Email screenshots, chat logs, document scans. My stomach started to tighten as I opened the most recent folder. The first file was a screenshot of an email exchange between Nora and someone named Trent Ardell. I recognized the name. He was another lawyer at her firm, maybe 5 years younger than us, single, the kind of guy who wore expensive suits and drove a BMW. The email was dated 3 days ago. The subject line read, Our conversation. "Trent," Nora had written, "I've been thinking about what you said at the Morrison prep meeting. You're right that we work well together, maybe too well for comfort, if you know what I mean. We should probably be more careful about how we interact around the office. People might get the wrong idea, or the right idea, depending on how you look at it." N. His response. "Nora, I think we're past worrying about office gossip. What we have is too good to waste on other people's opinions. Besides, it's not like Evan would ever suspect anything. He's too wrapped up in his little photography hobby to pay attention to what's really going on." T. Her reply. "You're probably right about Evan. Sometimes I think I could have an affair right in front of him and he'd be too busy adjusting his camera settings to notice. Still, we should be discreet. I have too much invested in my reputation to risk it for anyone, even you. N." I read the exchange 3 times before the words really sank in. Then I opened another file. And another. What I found was 2 years of my wife's contempt, laid out in digital black and white. Screenshots of text messages where she mocked my artistic pretensions to her colleagues. Email chains where she complained about being stuck with a husband who thinks taking pictures is a real career. Chat logs where she and Trent laughed about my adorable naivety regarding their relationship. But the worst part wasn't the affair itself. It was the casual cruelty of how she talked about me. Like I was a pet she'd grown tired of, but couldn't quite bring herself to get rid of. In one particularly brutal exchange from 6 months ago, Trent had asked why she didn't just leave me. "Divorce would be messy," she'd replied. "And expensive. Plus, Evan serves a purpose. He's safe, predictable, and he makes me look stable to the partners. Having a creative husband makes me seem well-rounded, like I have depth beyond just legal work. It's actually quite useful for my image. Useful for her image. 12 years of marriage reduced to personal branding. I sat there staring at the screen until the words started to blur. My hands were shaking, not with sadness, but with something much more dangerous. Rage, pure and clean and surprisingly focused. They thought I was too oblivious to notice, too wrapped up in my little photography hobby to pay attention to real life, too naive and trusting to suspect that my wife of 12 years was not just cheating on me, but treating our entire marriage like a convenient fiction. Well, maybe it was time to show them exactly how naive I really was. I spent the next 2 hours methodically copying every file in Nora's private folder to a secure cloud storage account. Screenshots, email threads, chat logs, even some photos I really wished I hadn't seen. Everything carefully organized and backed up where she'd never think to look for it. Then I closed her laptop and put it back exactly where she'd left it. By the time Nora came home that evening, apologetic about forgetting her computer, stressed about the Morrison case, completely normal, I was calmly editing wedding photos like nothing had happened. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question she asked every evening. "Productive," I said, which was more true than she could possibly know. She kissed the top of my head absently, already moving toward the kitchen to pour herself a glass of wine. "I might be late again tomorrow. Trent and I need to go over the deposition transcripts and plan our strategy for the next phase." Trent and I, how thoughtful of her to keep me informed about her schedule. "No problem," I said. "I've got plenty to keep me busy." That night, after Nora fell asleep, I lay awake planning. Not revenge, exactly. That was too crude, too emotional. What I was planning was more like a correction, an adjustment to the narrative my wife had been writing about our marriage. She thought I was naive? Perfect. Naive people were underestimated, overlooked, dismissed as harmless. She thought I was too absorbed in my work to pay attention? Excellent. That meant she wouldn't see me coming. She thought our marriage was useful for her image? Well, let's see how useful it remained when that carefully constructed image started to crumble. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Mara Solin's number. Mara had been Nora's best friend in law school, her maid of honor at our wedding, and one of the few people who'd known both of us long enough to remember when we'd actually seemed happy together. They'd grown apart over the years, different cities, different career tracks, different priorities. But Mara still sent Christmas cards, still asked about us when she was in town for work. She was a forensic accountant now, specializing in corporate fraud cases. I sent her a text. "Hey Mara, hope you're well. Random question, are you still in the fraud investigation business? Might need some professional advice about a hypothetical situation." Evan. Her response came an hour later. "Evan, good to hear from you. Yes, still chasing white-collar criminals for fun and profit. What kind of hypothetical situation? And how are you and Nora?" Well, that's complicated. Could we talk sometime this week? I'd rather explain over coffee than text. "Of course. I'm actually in town Thursday for a client meeting. Free for lunch?" "Perfect. Absolutely perfect." The next morning, I watched Nora get ready for another day of Morrison case strategy sessions with Trent. She was taking extra care with her appearance, the good perfume, the suit that made her look particularly sharp, makeup applied with precision. "You look nice," I said, because that's what a naive, oblivious husband would say. "Thanks. Important client meetings today." She checked her reflection one final time, satisfied with what she saw. "Don't wait up if I'm late. This case is at a critical stage." "I understand. Do what you need to do." She kissed my cheek and left, taking her laptop this time. I waited until her car was completely out of sight, then walked across the yard to Tessa's deck. She was there with her morning coffee, like she'd been expecting me. "You look different today," she said as I sat down. More focused. "I've been thinking about what you said, about things being taken for granted. And I think you might be right." She studied my face with those sharp green eyes. "Want to talk about it?" So I did. Not everything, not the private folder or the screenshots or the forensic accountant I was meeting for lunch tomorrow, but enough. Enough about feeling invisible in my own marriage, about being treated like a useful accessory rather than a partner. Tessa listened without judgment, asking occasional questions, but mostly just letting me talk. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I'm going to stop being taken for granted." That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. She nodded like she understood. "Well, whatever you decide to do, you should know. You're not as invisible as you think, at least not to everyone." I looked at her, this woman who'd seen something in me that my own wife had missed or dismissed. Thank you for saying that, for seeing me. Easy to see what's right in front of you if you're actually looking. That afternoon, I had a corporate headshot session downtown. The client was a mid-level executive at a consulting firm, the kind of guy who wanted to look approachable but authoritative, friendly but competent. I'd done hundreds of these sessions. They were bread-and-butter work, predictable and profitable. But as I worked, adjusting lights and coaching expressions, I found myself thinking about images and perception. How much of what people saw was reality, and how much was just careful presentation? Nora had spent years presenting our marriage as stable and successful, the reliable husband, the rising legal star, the perfect professional couple. But what happened when someone started adjusting the lighting, when the careful composition got disrupted? That evening, Nora came home later than usual, claiming the Morrison case strategy session had run long. She seemed energized rather than tired, with a flush in her cheeks that could have been professional excitement or something else entirely. "How did it go?" I asked. "Really well. Trent had some brilliant insights about the opposing counsel's weak points. We might actually be able to turn this case around." Trent's brilliant insights. How wonderful for both of them. "That's great, honey. I'm glad you have such a good working relationship." She glanced at me sharply, like she was checking for hidden meaning in the comment, but I kept my expression neutral, supportive, completely naive. "Yes," she said slowly. "We do work well together." Later that night, after she'd fallen asleep, I opened my laptop and started researching corporate law firms, partnership tracks, and professional ethics guidelines. If Nora wanted to use our marriage for her professional image, then I needed to understand exactly how that image could be adjusted. By morning, I had a much clearer picture of what I was dealing with, and more importantly, what I was going to do about it. The game was about to begin, and despite what my wife thought, I wasn't nearly as naive as I looked. Thursday's lunch with Mara took place at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where lawyers and accountants met to discuss cases over overpriced sandwiches. I arrived early, claiming a corner table where we could talk without being overheard. Mara looked exactly like I remembered, sharp-eyed, professionally dressed, with the kind of focused intelligence that made her excellent at uncovering financial fraud. She hugged me warmly when she arrived, but I could see her studying my face with professional interest. "You look terrible," she said without preamble as we sat down. "What's going on? That obvious?" "I've spent 15 years reading people who are trying to hide something. You're definitely hiding something. The question is whether it's criminal or just personal." "Personal. Definitely personal." She ordered a salad and coffee. I stuck with coffee. My appetite had been inconsistent lately. "So," Mara said once the server left, "tell me about this hypothetical situation that requires fraud investigation expertise." I'd rehearsed this conversation, but sitting across from someone who'd known both Nora and me for over a decade made it harder than I'd expected. "What would you say if I told you that someone was using fraudulent information to advance their career? Nothing illegal, exactly, but misrepresentation of their personal situation for professional gain?" Mara's eyebrows went up. "I'd say that's pretty vague. What kind of misrepresentation?" "Presenting a marriage as stable and successful when it's actually not. Using that false image to seem more reliable, more partnership-worthy to senior colleagues." She was quiet for a moment, processing. "Evan, are we talking about Nora?" "Hypothetically." "Hypothetically." Her voice was dry. "And what kind of instability are we talking about? Financial problems, marital issues?" "The latter." "Affair?" I nodded. Mara sat back in her chair, coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Well, that's not exactly fraud in the legal sense. Lots of people present idealized versions of their personal lives at work. But if she's actively lying about her situation to gain professional advantage, what if there were other issues? Financial irregularities, maybe? Misuse of firm resources? Now that would be more serious. Corporate law firms take ethics violations very seriously, especially when it comes to partnership candidates. Any hint of impropriety can torpedo a career." She studied my face. "How hypothetical is this conversation, Evan?" "Not very." "And what exactly are you planning to do with this information?" That was the question, wasn't it? I'd spent 3 days thinking about it, and I still wasn't entirely sure, but I was starting to have some ideas. "I'm not sure yet, but I want to understand my options." Mara leaned forward, her expression serious. "Evan, I've known you and Nora for a long time. You're one of the most decent people I've ever met. But if you're thinking about going to war with your wife over her career, I'm not going to war. I'm just tired of being treated like I don't exist. Fair enough, but be careful. Nora's smart, and she's ruthless when she needs to be. If you're going to make a move, make sure you're ready for the consequences. What would you do in my situation? She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup. Honestly, I'd probably burn it all down. But that's because I have trust issues and a vindictive streak. You're better than that. Maybe I don't want to be better than that anymore. Something in my tone made her look up sharply. Okay, if you're serious about this, here's what you need to know. For the next hour, Mara gave me a crash course in corporate ethics violations, professional misconduct, and the kinds of evidence that could damage a legal career. She also shared some interesting insights about Kellerman, Bray & Associates' internal politics and partnership review process. The firm's been having some financial irregularities lately, she mentioned casually. Nothing major, but enough to make the partners nervous about any additional scandals. They're being extra careful about who they promote. What kind of irregularities? Client expense accounts, mostly. Someone's been padding billable hours, maybe skimming from client entertainment budgets. The partners hired an outside firm to investigate, but they haven't found the source yet. Interesting. Very interesting. Hypothetically, I said, if someone wanted to report suspicious activity at the firm, how would they go about it? Anonymous tip to the State Bar Association, or directly to the managing partners, if you had solid evidence. She paused. But Evan, once you start down that road, there's no going back. Are you sure this is what you want? I thought about Nora's private folder, about 2 years of contempt and casual cruelty, about being called naive and oblivious and useful for her image. I'm sure. That afternoon, I had a family portrait session in the suburbs. Another young couple, this one with a toddler who kept trying to escape the frame. Usually, these sessions were pure joy for me. Kids that age were natural and unself-conscious, and their parents were still in that phase where every moment felt precious. But today, I found myself studying the dynamics between the husband and wife, the way they looked at each other, the casual intimacy of shared glances and inside jokes, the way they talked about their future plans like they were building something together rather than just occupying the same space. When had Nora and I stopped building something together? When had we become just two people sharing a house and a bank account? The session ran long because the toddler was being particularly uncooperative, which meant I got home later than usual. Nora's car was already in the driveway, which was unusual for a Thursday evening. I found her in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine with sharp, frustrated movements. You're home early, I said. Morrison case got postponed. Opposing counsel had a scheduling conflict. She took a large sip of wine. Whole day wasted. That's frustrating. What about your strategy session with Trent? Cancelled, obviously. Another sip. Sometimes I think this partnership track is more trouble than it's worth. This was new. Nora never expressed doubts about her career ambitions. Something had shifted. Want to talk about it? She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time in months. Would you actually listen, or would you just nod and go back to your photos? The comment stung, partly because it wasn't entirely unfair, but also because it revealed how she really saw our interactions. Me as a distracted, self-absorbed husband who couldn't be bothered with her real concerns. I'd listen, I said. For a moment, I thought she might actually open up, might treat me like a partner instead of a roommate. But then her phone buzzed with a text message, and whatever moment we'd almost had evaporated. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted. I should take this. Work stuff. She disappeared into her home office, closing the door behind her. I heard her voice through the walls, too quiet to make out words, but the tone was warm, intimate, not the voice she used for work calls. I went to my own office and opened my laptop. Time to start putting Mara's advice to practical use. The first step was organizing the evidence I'd already gathered from Nora's private folder. Screenshots, email threads, chat logs, everything carefully categorized and documented. But that was just the foundation. If I was going to do this, I needed more. I started with Trent Ardell's background, social media profiles, professional history, any public information I could find. He was exactly what I'd expected, ambitious, well-connected, the kind of lawyer who networked aggressively and cultivated the right relationships. But he was also careless. His Instagram account was public, and it told an interesting story. Expensive dinners at restaurants I recognized from Nora's credit card statements. Weekend trips to places she'd claimed were work conferences. Photos from events she'd attended as firm business. The timeline was damning. For the past 18 months, Trent's social life had aligned suspiciously well with Nora's professional obligations. More interesting were the financial patterns I could piece together from public records and social media posts. Trent's lifestyle seemed to exceed what a junior associate should be able to afford. Designer clothes, expensive car, high-end apartment in the city's most desirable neighborhood. Either he had family money, or he was finding creative ways to supplement his income. I spent the evening building a comprehensive file on both Nora and Trent. Financial records, professional histories, social media analysis, timeline correlations. By midnight, I had a clearer picture of what I was dealing with, and I was starting to formulate a plan. The next morning, Nora was back to her usual efficient routine: coffee, news, reviewing case files at the kitchen table. She seemed to have forgotten about her moment of vulnerability the night before. "I'll be late again tonight," she said without looking up from her laptop. "The Morrison case is back on track, and Trent and I need to make up for yesterday's lost time." "Of course you do." Something in my tone made her glance up. "Is there a problem?" "No problem. Just hope you and Trent can get everything sorted out." She studied my face for a moment, but I kept my expression neutral. Supportive, naive. "We will," she said finally. "This case is too important to let personal complications get in the way." Personal complications. Interesting choice of words. After she left, I walked across the yard to Tessa's deck. She was there with her morning coffee, like always. "You look different again," she said as I sat down. "More determined." "I've been thinking about what we talked about not being taken for granted." "And you've decided to do something about it?" "I'm working on it." She poured me coffee from her French press, and we sat in comfortable silence for a while. It struck me how easy this was, just sitting with someone who saw me as worth talking to, worth spending time with. "Can I ask you something?" I said eventually. "Sure." "At the barbecue, when you said you'd take me, were you serious?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. Serious about what, exactly? About seeing something in me that's worth taking. "Evan." Her voice was gentle but direct. "I've been watching you and Nora for 2 years. I see how she treats you, how she talks to you, like you're an inconvenience she's learned to tolerate. And I see how you've started to believe that's what you deserve. Maybe it is what I deserve." "No." Her tone was firm. "It's not. You're kind, talented, genuinely interested in other people. You pay attention to things that matter. You make people feel seen and valued. That's rare." "Nora doesn't seem to think so." "Then Nora's an idiot." Despite everything, that made me smile. She's a lot of things, but she's not an idiot. "Fine. Then she's smart enough to know what she's throwing away, which makes it worse." We talked for another hour, about photography, about her work in marketing, about books and movies and all the small things that make up a life. Normal conversation between two people who actually liked each other. When I finally went back inside, I felt more centered than I had in weeks. Whatever happened with Nora and Trent, whatever consequences came from the plan I was developing, at least I knew I wasn't as invisible as I'd started to believe. That afternoon, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the State Bar Association's ethics hotline. I didn't file a formal complaint, not yet, but I asked about procedures, documentation requirements, the kind of evidence they'd need to investigate potential misconduct. The second call was to an old college friend who worked in corporate security. We'd kept in touch over the years, and I knew he specialized in investigating financial irregularities and professional misconduct. "Evan," he said when I explained what I needed. "Are you sure about this? Once you start pulling these threads, everything unravels." "I'm sure." "All right. Send me what you have, and I'll see what I can do. But be prepared. This could get messy." Messy. That was fine. My marriage was already messy. My life was already messy. At least now the mess would be honest. That evening, Nora came home late again, energized and flushed from another successful strategy session with Trent. She was humming as she poured herself wine, more animated than I'd seen her in months. "Good day?" I asked. "Excellent day. We made real progress on the Morrison case. Trent's insights are invaluable." "He sounds like quite a partner." "He is." She paused, wine glass halfway to her lips. "In the professional sense, obviously." "Obviously?" She went to bed early, claiming exhaustion from the long day. But I heard her phone buzzing with text messages well past midnight. I lay there listening to the soft chimes, thinking about partnerships and insights and the difference between professional and personal collaboration, thinking about evidence and ethics violations and the careful construction of professional reputations. By morning, I knew exactly what my next move would be. The game was accelerating, and despite what Nora thought, I was several moves ahead. The Morrison case strategy session on Friday afternoon was scheduled to run until 7 p.m. Nora mentioned it over breakfast, along with the usual warnings about working late and not waiting up. "Trent and I really need to nail down our approach before Monday's hearing," she said, checking her appearance in the hallway mirror. This could make or break the whole case. I'm sure you two will figure it out. You make a good team. She glanced at me sharply, but I was reading the newspaper with apparent disinterest. Just a supportive husband making conversation. Yes, she said slowly. We do. After she left, I spent an hour organizing the evidence files I'd been building. Screenshots, financial records, timeline correlations, social media analysis, everything carefully documented and cross-referenced. Then I drove downtown to Kellerman, Bray & Associates. I'd been to Nora's office building plenty of times, but always as a spouse attending firm events. Today, I was just another visitor in the lobby, unremarkable and easily overlooked. The building had a parking garage with decent sightlines to the elevator banks. I found a spot with a clear view of the main entrance and settled in to wait. At 4:30 p.m., I watched Nora and Trent leave the building together. They weren't heading to a conference room for a strategy session. They were getting into Trent's BMW and driving away from downtown entirely. I followed at a distance, keeping several cars between us. Basic surveillance techniques I'd picked up from photography work, how to observe without being observed, how to stay invisible while seeing everything. They drove to the Meridian Hotel, a boutique place in the arts district that catered to wealthy tourists and business travelers. The kind of hotel that valued discretion and didn't ask too many questions about guests who paid in cash. I watched them enter the lobby together, Nora's hand resting casually on Trent's arm. They moved like people who'd done this before, comfortable with the routine. I waited 15 minutes, then followed them inside. The lobby was elegant and dimly lit, designed for intimate conversations and private meetings. I found a seat in the bar area with a clear view of the elevator banks and ordered coffee I didn't want. At 6:45 p.m., they emerged from the elevators. Nora looked composed but slightly disheveled, her hair not quite as perfect as it had been that morning. Trent was checking his phone, already moving on to whatever came next. They didn't leave together. Trent headed for the parking garage while Nora went to the ladies' room. When she came out, she'd repaired her makeup and smoothed her hair. She looked exactly like someone who'd spent the afternoon in a conference room reviewing legal documents. I waited until they were both gone, then approached the front desk. "Excuse me," I said to the clerk, adopting the slightly confused tone of a man who wasn't entirely sure what he was doing. "I think my wife might have left something in one of your conference rooms. She was here this afternoon for a business meeting." The clerk was young and eager to help. "What's your wife's name? I can check our conference room reservations." "Nora Mercer. She would have been with a colleague, Trent Ardell." He typed something into his computer, frowning slightly. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't show any conference room reservations under either of those names today." "Oh," I let confusion creep into my voice. "Maybe they were meeting with a client? She mentioned something about the Meridian." "Well, we do have a Mr. Ardell registered as a guest. Room 412. But that's not a conference room. That's one of our suites." "Perfect. Absolutely perfect." "I must have misunderstood. Thanks for checking." I left the hotel with exactly what I'd come for. Confirmation that Nora's afternoon strategy sessions weren't taking place in conference rooms. They were taking place in hotel suites that Trent was renting by the hour. The drive home gave me time to think about what came next. I had evidence of the affair, financial irregularities, and now a clear pattern of deception about how they were spending their time. But evidence was just the foundation. What I needed was leverage. Nora came home at 8:30 p.m., looking appropriately tired from her long day of legal strategizing. "How did the session go?" I asked. "Productive. Very productive. Trent had some creative approaches to the witness testimony that could really strengthen our position." Creative approaches. That was one way to put it. "That's great. You two seem to work really well together." "We do." She poured herself wine, settling into her usual evening routine. "Sometimes I think he understands my legal instincts better than anyone else at the firm." Understanding each other is important in any partnership. Something in my tone made her pause, wineglass halfway to her lips. "Evan, is everything okay? You've been different lately." "Different how?" "I don't know. More attentive, maybe? You're asking more questions about my work." "I'm interested in your career. I always have been." "Have you?" She studied my face with the same intensity she probably used on hostile witnesses. "Sometimes I wonder if you really pay attention to what I do all day." "I pay attention to more than you think." She seemed to accept this, or maybe she was too wrapped up in post-affair satisfaction to push further. We spent the evening in our usual parallel activities, her reviewing case files, me editing photos, like roommates sharing space, but not much else. But I wasn't really editing photos. I was researching hotel guest registries, corporate expense account policies, and the specific ethics rules that govern attorney conduct in our state. By midnight, I had a much clearer picture of exactly how many professional boundaries Nora and Trent were crossing, and more importantly, how to document those violations in ways that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. Saturday morning brought a text from Tessa. "Coffee on the deck? You look like you could use someone to talk to." I found her in her usual spot, French press ready, wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look younger and more relaxed than her professional wardrobe allowed. "Rough week?" she asked as I sat down. "Enlightening week." "Want to talk about it?" I told her about the hotel, the fake strategy sessions, the mounting evidence of deception. Not everything, not the financial irregularities or the ethics violations I was documenting, but enough to explain why I looked like someone who'd been systematically betrayed by the person he trusted most. Tessa listened without judgment, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me process out loud. "So what's your plan?" she asked when I finished. "I'm still working on it." "But you have something in mind." "Maybe." She was quiet for a moment, studying my face. "Evan, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "What do you want out of this? Justice? Revenge? Just an end to the lies?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for days. "I want her to stop treating me like I'm stupid," I said finally. "I want her to face consequences for her choices, instead of just assuming I'll never notice or never care enough to do anything about it. And after that, what happens to your marriage?" "I think my marriage ended a long time ago. I just didn't realize it until this week." She nodded like she'd expected that answer. "For what it's worth, I think you're handling this better than most people would. Most people would probably just file for divorce and move on. Most people aren't married to someone who's been systematically undermining their self-worth for years. Sometimes you have to prove to yourself that you're not who they said you were." That hit closer to home than I'd expected. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I think you're remembering that you're not invisible, and that you deserve better than being useful for someone else's image." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up around us. Normal Saturday morning activities, people walking dogs, kids riding bikes, couples working in their yards together. "Can I tell you something?" Tessa said eventually. "Of course." "I meant what I said at the barbecue, about taking you. Not as a joke or a way to get under Nora's skin. I meant it." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd been too distracted to notice before. Interest, genuine attraction. The possibility of something real with someone who actually saw me as worth having. "Tessa, I'm not asking you to do anything about it right now," she said quickly. "I know you have other things to figure out first, but I wanted you to know. You're not as alone in this as you think." That afternoon, I had a wedding to shoot in the suburbs. The bride and groom were college sweethearts, surrounded by friends and family who clearly believed in their future together. The kind of wedding that reminded me why I'd gotten into photography in the first place, capturing moments of genuine joy and connection. But as I worked, adjusting angles and coaching poses, I found myself thinking about beginnings and endings, about the difference between a relationship built on mutual respect and one built on convenience and image management. The reception ran late, which meant I didn't get home until nearly 11 p.m. Nora's car wasn't in the driveway. I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Emergency Morrison case meeting. Don't wait up." N. Emergency meeting on a Saturday night. Right? I was uploading photos from the wedding when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Is this Evan Mercer? This is Jake Morrison. I think we need to talk." Jake Morrison. As in the Morrison case that was consuming so much of Nora's time and energy. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Who is this?" "The client your wife is supposedly representing, except I fired Kellerman Bray 3 weeks ago, so I'm curious why she's still billing emergency strategy sessions to my case." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. I read the message 3 times before the implications really sank in. Nora wasn't working late on the Morrison case. There was no Morrison case, not anymore, which meant every late night, every emergency meeting, every strategy session with Trent had been a lie. My phone buzzed again. "Coffee tomorrow? I think there are some things you should know about what your wife has been doing with my retainer money." I typed back, "Yes, definitely yes." Then I sat in my office, surrounded by photos of happy couples and genuine connections, and realized that my marriage wasn't just built on lies. It was built on fraud, and fraud unlike adultery, was something I could do something about. Jake Morrison turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s who owned a small manufacturing company that had been targeted for acquisition by a larger corporation. He'd hired Kellerman, Bray, and Associates to represent him in the merger negotiations, specifically requesting Nora because of her reputation for aggressive corporate defense. We met at a diner across town, the kind of place where lawyers and their clients definitely wouldn't cross paths on a Sunday morning. "Your wife is talented," Jake said without preamble as we settled into a corner booth. "Brilliant, actually, for the 6 weeks she actually worked on my case." 6 weeks? The merger talks collapsed in early September. The acquiring company pulled out, decided my business wasn't worth the hassle. Case closed, no more legal fees. He stirred sugar into his coffee with deliberate movements. "Except your wife kept billing me for strategy sessions and case preparation, even after I fired the firm." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "How much?" $47,000 over the past 3 weeks. Emergency consultations, document review, expert witness preparation for a case that no longer existed. $47,000. No wonder Nora had seemed so energized lately, so confident about her partnership prospects. She wasn't just having an affair with Trent. She was stealing from clients to fund it. "Why are you telling me this instead of going to the police?" Jake smiled grimly. "Oh, I'm going to the police, and the State Bar Association, and the managing partners at Kellerman, Bray. But I thought you deserved to know what your wife has been doing before it all comes out publicly." "That's considerate of you." "My daughter went through a messy divorce last year. Her husband was cheating and stealing from their joint accounts to pay for it. She had no idea until the bank called about overdraft fees." He met my eyes. Nobody should find out their spouse is a criminal by reading about it in the newspaper. We spent the next hour going over the details. Forged invoices, fake case updates, elaborate documentation for legal work that had never been performed. Nora had been systematically billing Jake's retainer account while telling him the money was going toward essential case preparation. "The really clever part," Jake said, "is that she was splitting the fees with someone else at the firm, probably her co-counsel on the case, so it looked like legitimate collaborative billing. Trent. Of course it was Trent. Do you have documentation?" Jake pulled out a thick folder. Invoices, bank records, email correspondence, the works, plus recordings of phone calls where your wife assured me the work was essential and time-sensitive. Recordings, legal evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and professional misconduct. Everything I'd been building toward, handed to me by a client who'd been systematically robbed by my wife and her lover. What happens now? Now I file complaints with every relevant authority and let them sort it out. Your wife's career is over, and probably her partner's too. They'll face criminal charges, civil liability, and professional sanctions. He paused. "I'm sorry, Evan. I know this can't be easy to hear." Easy? Nothing about the past week had been easy, but this wasn't just personal betrayal anymore. This was criminal behavior that could be prosecuted and punished. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me, for giving me a chance to prepare." "What will you do?" Good question. What would I do with the knowledge that my wife was not just an adulterer but a felon? That her partnership ambitions were built on stolen money and fraudulent billing? I'm not sure yet, but I won't get in the way of your complaints. I appreciate that. And Evan, whatever you decide to do about your marriage, don't let her convince you this was somehow your fault. People who steal and lie are making choices. You didn't make those choices for her. I drove home in a daze, Jake's folder sitting on the passenger seat like evidence of everything my life had become. Nora's car was in the driveway. She'd apparently made it home from her emergency Saturday night strategy session. I found her in the kitchen, making coffee and scrolling through her phone with the satisfied expression of someone who'd had a very successful weekend. "Morning," she said without looking up. "How was your evening? I got home late from the Morrison case meeting." The Morrison case meeting, with a client who'd fired her firm 3 weeks ago. It was fine, productive. I poured myself coffee, keeping my voice casual. "How's the case going? Still think you can turn it around?" "Definitely. Trent and I made some real breakthroughs last night. The client is going to be thrilled with our progress." I bet he would be, especially when he found out his retainer money had been funding hotel rooms and fake billing schemes. "That's great, honey. You and Trent make such a good team." She finally looked up from her phone, studying my face with sudden attention. "Evan, you've been saying that a lot lately, about Trent and me being a good team." "Have I? I guess I'm just impressed by how well you work together." "It's a professional relationship." "Of course it is." Something in my tone made her set down her phone. "Is there something you want to ask me?" This was the moment. The choice between continuing to play naive and confronting her with everything I knew. Between maintaining the fiction of our marriage and forcing her to face the consequences of her choices. I thought about Jake Morrison's daughter, finding out her husband was a criminal when the bank called about overdraft fees, about Tessa's words about not being invisible, about 2 years of contempt and casual dismissal. Actually, I said, there is something I want to ask you. Her body language shifted, becoming more alert. What? I want to ask you how long you've been stealing from your clients to pay for hotel rooms with Trent. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor. What did you say? I said I know about the Morrison case. I know Jake fired your firm 3 weeks ago. I know about the fraudulent billing and the fake strategy sessions and the hotel suite at the Meridian. I kept my voice calm, conversational. I know about all of it, Nora. She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her cycle through emotions, shock, fear, anger, and finally calculation. Even caught red-handed, she was trying to figure out how to manage the situation. I don't know what you think you know, she said finally, but you're clearly confused about something. Am I? Because Jake Morrison seemed pretty clear when he showed me the invoices for work you never performed, the recordings of phone calls where you lied to him about case progress, the bank records showing exactly where his retainer money went. That stopped her cold. You talked to Jake Morrison? He wanted to give me a heads up before he files criminal complaints against you and Trent tomorrow morning. She sank into a kitchen chair, all pretense finally abandoned. How long have you known? About the affair? A week? About the fraud? Since this morning? A week. She laughed bitterly. You've known for a week and you didn't say anything? I was curious to see how far you'd go, how many lies you'd tell, how much you'd steal. I sat down across from her. Turns out, quite a lot. Evan, you don't understand. The Morrison case was complicated, and the billing issues are just misunderstandings that can be resolved. Stop. My voice was sharper than I'd intended. Just stop lying. It's over, Nora. Jake has recordings, bank records, documentation of everything. Your career is finished. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You did this. You orchestrated this somehow. I didn't orchestrate anything. I just stopped being naive enough to believe your lies. You vindictive bastard. You couldn't just leave things alone, could you? You had to destroy everything. I didn't destroy anything. You did that yourself when you decided to steal money to fund your affair. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. What do you want? Money? A bigger divorce settlement? What's your price for keeping quiet about this? I don't want your money, Nora. I want you to face the consequences of what you've done. And what about us? Our marriage? I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just a kind of empty relief that the pretense was finally over. What marriage? You've been treating me like a useful prop for years. A convenient image enhancement for your professional brand. I stood up. Well, congratulations. You're about to find out how useful I really am? What does that mean? It means I'm not going to lie for you. I'm not going to help you cover this up. And I'm not going to pretend our marriage was something it never was. She stared at me with growing desperation. Evan, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling, rebuild trust. Trust? I almost laughed. Nora, you've been stealing money to pay for hotel rooms where you meet with your colleague. Then you come home and lie to me about working late. What exactly is there to rebuild? I made mistakes. You committed crimes. Multiple felonies. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen. Everything okay over there? Heard raised voices. T. Tessa, checking on me from next door. I'm going for a walk, I said. When I get back, I want you to be gone. Gone? This is my house, too. This is the house you bought with stolen money while lying to your husband about working late. I wouldn't get too attached to it. I left her standing in the kitchen, surrounded by broken ceramic and the ruins of her carefully constructed life. Outside, the morning was crisp and clear. Normal Sunday activities were happening around the neighborhood. People reading newspapers, walking dogs, working in their yards. Life going on as usual, while my world realigned itself around truth instead of lies. Tessa was on her deck, coffee in hand, clearly waiting for me. Rough morning? She asked as I walked over. You could say that? Want to talk about it? So I did. Everything. The fraud, the confrontation, the criminal complaints that would be filed tomorrow morning, the end of my marriage, and the beginning of whatever came next. Tessa listened without judgment, asking occasional questions, but mostly just letting me process the magnitude of what had just happened. "How do you feel?" she asked when I finished. "Honestly, relieved, like I can finally stop pretending everything was fine. And what happens now? Now I figure out what my life looks like when it's actually mine." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from anyone in longer than I could remember. "I think you're going to like that life." "I hope so." We sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up around us. Normal Sunday morning activities, but nothing felt normal anymore. Everything felt possible. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Nora. "Please don't do this. We can fix everything if you just give me a chance." I showed the message to Tessa. She read it and shook her head, still trying to manage the situation. "Old habits. Are you going to respond?" I thought about it for a moment, then deleted the message without replying. "No," I said. "I think I'm done being managed." Later that afternoon, after Nora had packed a bag and left for parts unknown, I sat in my office looking through the photos from yesterday's wedding. Happy couples, genuine connections, people building something real together. For the first time in years, I could imagine being in one of those photos myself, not as Nora's useful husband, but as someone worth loving for who I actually was. My phone rang. Mara's name appeared on the screen. "Evan? I just heard from a contact at the State Bar Association. Something about complaints being filed against Nora tomorrow. What the hell is going on?" "It's a long story," I said. "But the short version is that my wife has been stealing from clients to fund an affair, and it's all about to come out." "Holy shit. Are you okay?" "I'm better than I've been in years." "Do you need anything? Legal advice, a place to stay, someone to help you navigate this mess?" "Actually," I said, looking out the window toward Tessa's house, "I think I'm going to be fine." And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I actually believed it. The reckoning was just beginning, but it was my reckoning now. My choices, my consequences, my life, finally.